while I'm talking. I let my students do that in class all the time. So I wanted to talk about this commandment, the sixth commandment, because I've taught courses on the Ten Commandments, and one of the joys of doing that is helping us see that what seems so clear and simple and obvious, it often is not. The sixth commandment consists of two words in Hebrew, lo tirtzach. That's it. And it is supposed to be, and the Ten Commandments are supposed to be simple in the sense that the Ten Commandments are about what the legal philosopher Len Fuller calls the morality of duty. The Ten Commandments are a description of the basic requirements for what, from the Torah's point of view, constitutes a civilized society. These are basic to civilized society. And of course, the last five commandments are about boundaries and respecting the integrity of others and of other relationships. Murder is obviously the most radical form of not respecting boundaries, of not valuing the lives of others. Adultery is not respecting the boundary of a relationship from both sides. The person who enters into a relationship with a married person is entering into that relationship, and the other party is, in a sense, welcoming that person into her marital bed, literally or figuratively. But the boundary has been breached. Theft, again, witnessing falsely is going to lead to, in the moment, it may not involve my taking something that belongs to you and giving it to someone else and that taking it from me, but it will lead to that. And then the 10th, the most interesting and least understood of the 10 commandments, which is lo tachmod, you shall not covet, is really the basis for all of those others. That's where all of those other transgressions come from. Because lo tachmod, coveting, is to want that which is not meant for me. And once I have that desire, not as a fleeting desire, but as a source of obsession, at that point, mayhem ensues. Bad things happen, or I do bad things, to be precise. I don't want to do President Nixon's mistakes were made line. We become the authors of evil. And that's because we cannot tamp down our desires and our obsessions. That's where it comes from. So these are obvious needs of society, and yet, these commandments are not simple ones. And we will see a few ways in which that's true of lo tirtzach. The first is, what do those words actually mean? The second, which flows from the first, is under what circumstances, if any, are we permitted to kill? And then finally, I want to spend some time talking about the extended significance of this prohibition. And I invite you, because I think we are all fully aware that we live in a time when questions of do not kill are very much on our minds, because there are a lot of ways of bringing about death. And in the world in which we live, we have to answer some difficult questions about what actions we may and may not take, given that we know that in some way they might lead to someone's death or many people's death. I'm not the expert on this, but the beginning of it is to know that and to be aware of it, and also to know that our tradition has things to say about this. All right, so I'm now going to share with you a PowerPoint that has the sources. Yeah, that's it, right? Whoop. Why is sharing screen? Just a minute.
The screen sharing is paused. Let's start again.
Okay, I'm taking 2 here. Okay,
You'll have to move that in the corner.
Yeah,
So that
okay.
I can see.
All right. So you shall not murder or you shall not kill, exploring the parameters of the 6th commandment. So let's start with the verse that we all know, but also don't. The 6th commandment is Lo Tirtzach. The new JPS translation is you shall not murder. The King James Version is thou shalt not kill. Now what's going on here? If Lo Tirtzach means you shall not kill, really? There are so many instances in the Torah where execution, state-sponsored killing, if you were, not to put too fine a point on it, is permitted and mandated. And this is what has led to translating Lo Tirtzach as you shall not murder. Because what that translation means is there's killing and there's killing. There's justified or warranted killing, and there's unwarranted killing. And in saying Lo Tirtzach, the Torah is forbidding unwarranted killing, not killing per se. That's how we generally understand this prohibition. However, it's not so simple. Let's see the following verse, which talks about capital punishment. Makeh ish v'meit mot yumat, va'asher lo tzada, v'ha'elohim mina liyado, v'samti lecha makom, asher yanus shama. He who fatally strikes a man shall be put to death. If he did not do it by design, but it came about by an act of God, I will assign you a place to which he can flee. Those are the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, to which an unintentional murder can flee. The biblical scholar Moshe Greenberg makes an interesting point here. Right? We're told that if I kill someone else, then the authorities will kill me. That is the punishment. Now, here's the point that Moshe Greenberg makes. If you compare biblical law to other ancient Near Eastern law, you will see that in other ancient Near Eastern systems, you could ransom yourself. If you had murdered, you could ransom yourself by paying a certain fine. And it also depended what class were you from, upper class, lower class, slave, so on. What Greenberg says is the Torah absolutely rejects this idea. And we'll see the specific verse in the next slide, which makes this clear. And what Greenberg says is that for the Torah, human life is of such infinite value, it cannot be, what's the word I'm looking for? Commodified, it cannot be monetized. So you can't say, oh, I know I killed so-and-so, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $100,000, $1 million, that should be sufficient. No, the Torah says, human life is of infinite value. And therefore, the only appropriate punishment is death. Now, we all understand that there's a paradox here. You're telling me that life is of infinite value, and that's why no other punishment is possible but death, which means the destruction of a life of infinite value. We're not the first to see this paradox, just want to make sure that we see it because it will come up later. Also, while we're looking at these verses, it's also important to note another principle that is being enunciated here. Part of what makes me culpable as a killer is intention. So the fact that I killed someone or an act of mine led to someone's death does not automatically make me a killer subject to capital punishment. Intention does matter. And that's the second verse. If he did not do it by design, but it came back by act of God, and so on, etc. Right, let's look at the next verse. And here we have the verse that I was talking about before. V'lo tikchu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu rasha lamut ki mot yumad. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. And this verse is the Torah being in conversation with the surrounding cultures. And the author is well aware that ransom is accepted in many cultures when one commits a murder. And the Torah is saying, not here. That is not our culture. We do not accept ransom. There actually, having just said that, there is one instance in which ransom is accepted, and that is the case that we have here. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox is not to be punished. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring, and its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner too shall be put to death. If ransom is laid upon him, and the Hebrew for ransom is kofer, the same word that we had in the previous verse, lo tikchu kofer lenefesh rotzeach, do not take ransom. In this case, because I did not kill directly, it was my animal who caused the death. And it was negligence on my part. Passive. I was a passive cause, not an active cause of the person's death. Therefore, if ransom is laid upon him, he must pay whatever is laid upon him to redeem his life. So here, and only here, is ransom accepted. Now let's come back to this question of what tirtzach means, what the root resh tzadichet means. So we have a verse here that talks about the need to have two witnesses to convict someone of murder and many other crimes too. Now the Hebrew is kol makeh nefesh lefi edim yirtzach et harotzeach. That half of the verse said, well, read the whole. Eid echad lo ya'aneh b'nefesh lamut. In English, kol makeh nefesh. If anyone kills a person, everyone agrees that that's the right translation. Lefi edim, on the evidence of witnesses, I'm switching around the translation a little bit. Yirtzach et harotzeach. So notice the same root, resh tzadi chet, is used to describe the executioners, yirtzach, those who are going to execute, et harotzeach, the murderer. So the translation of the new JPS translation has the manslayer, that's the rotzeach, may be executed yirtzach. So JPS is taking the same root and translating it in two different ways. Why? Because the translator is insisting that execution and murder are not the same thing, although in the Hebrew of this verse, that would seem to be the case. Okay? You're killing the killer. He killed, you're killing. And that's why I put below the literal translation, if anyone kills a person, the killer may be killed only on the evidence of witnesses. Literally, this verse is linguistically equating a murderer and the court that kills him. They are both rotzchim. And therefore, it would seem that when I read this verse and I read that the court is yirtzach, I will have in my mind, wait a second, the sixth commandment, lo tirtzach. So you're telling me that the court, when they execute someone, are rotzchim? How can that be? That's prohibited. And we also have a rabbinic example of using the root resh tzadichet to mean execution. This is a kind of technical question here. The question is, can a court meet on Shabbat and carry out execution on Shabbat? And the Rabbi Reish Lakish is making an argument for saying that you can. So he uses what we call a kal v'chomer. I'm not going to get into it now. I think it would be diminishing returns. But the point is, if you start in the second line of the English, after the period, the third word, and he said, for if the service, the temple service, which overrides the Shabbat, right? Sacrifices are offered on Shabbat, even though I'm not allowed to kindle a flame on Shabbat. So the service which overrides Shabbat is overridden by an execution. And what is the phrase that Resh Lakish uses to describe execution? Ritzichat mitzvah, killing for the sake of a mitzvah, a warranted killing. So what's interesting about this usage is Resh Lakish is saying death, killing is all killing. Let's not pretty it up. If the court kills someone, they're killing them. If a murderer kills someone, they're killing them. But what we're saying is that in certain cases, there is ritzichat mitzvah. Yes, I'm killing, but I am commanded to do so. All right, let's just take a moment to see if anybody has any questions that you would like to ask until this point. And if not, we'll move along. We're moving along. Are there questions? Okay, we're moving along. Okay. Now,
wait, can I just ask a question? In reading that sentence, so they're saying that the service is equivalent to the execution because they could both
they should both
both override the Sabbath. So therefore,
right.
Equivalency. I just want to make sure I was getting that part.
Yes.
Okay. I think mathematically.
Okay. So here's something very important. When we read rabbinic texts, I often say to my students, almost every declarative statement is an answer to an unasked question. And many declarative statements are answers to challenges. And here actually we have the challenge. And it's pretty clear what the challenge is. But think about what we've said so far. We've said that the true meaning of lo tirtzach is not do not murder, but do not kill. And the way to read that, therefore, is the way I read the Torah is saying, it is always wrong to kill. But there are circumstances under which I, God, will command you to kill nonetheless, like execution. And just to cite a case where even those of us who are opposed to capital punishment, I think would agree, war. If I go out to war and I'm issued a weapon, I am, like 007, licensed to kill. Right? And if I kill somebody, I kill them. So what the Torah is saying is killing is wrong, and sometimes it's warranted. But that leads to a problem. Maybe we shouldn't kill people, especially because a person has already been killed. Someone murders someone. So someone's dead. Now, what are you going to accomplish? You're going to cause another person to be dead? Does that accomplish anything? And the Midrash, Rabbinic Midrash, says that it says in connection with execution, Lo tachos eincha alav. Do not pity him. Do not pity the murderer. And they say about this is an admonition not to mercifully spare the killer. We should not say, the one has already been killed. Of what use is killing the other? And many people indeed make this argument. Thus, the execution will be neglected if you take this point of view. The Torah is emphasizing, do not pity him. Rather, I'm going back to the text, rather he must be killed. And now listen to this last statement. Abba Hanan says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, whenever the Torah specifies an apparently, and apparently actually should be bracketed, apparently it does not appear in the text, but apparently that's what they mean. Torah specifies an apparently unjust punishment, it is written, do not pity. So the Midrash here is acknowledging that if taking life is inherently wrong, then maybe execution doesn't make sense. Maybe it's even unjust. But the Midrash says, the Torah says we must do it, and therefore we must do it. But the point of this Midrash, here's what I want to get at in the nature of the Midrash. What is so powerful for me and refreshing about Midrashim like this one is that the Torah is wrestling, or the rabbis are wrestling, and they're not hiding the problematic nature of the biblical text. They're saying, I know, you look at this commandment to execute someone, and you say to yourself, really, is that right? So in the end, the rabbis defend the Torah, but in defending it, they also, or I don't even know if they defend it, but they insist upon it. But in doing so, they acknowledge this is not so easy to understand and to accept, this whole capital punishment business. Okay. We have another version of this same Midrash, which is also striking in its wording. It's on that same phrase. And the Midrash says, perhaps he will say, since the one has been killed, why should we incur the guilt of spilling the other's blood? Therefore, the Torah says, do not pity him. So here, execution, an executioner is being described as guilty, as being guilty of spilling blood. So again, the idea is maybe we're going to have execution, but we can't get away from the fact that it's ritzicha, it's killing. And just as murder is killing, execution is killing. And there is some guilt there. That is what the Torah seems to be saying. In other words, if there may be times when you have to execute or kill, but always know that you're killing. In some part of what you're doing something terrible. Now, the fact that the Torah itself, although it allows for execution, indicates to us in a number of ways, and the rabbis also are aware of this, that there's something hard to justify about killing another human being, no matter what the reason, leads to the rabbis modifying this practice, or at least in theory, it's probably not in practice, but seeking to basically erase capital punishment from the books. And we have here a Mishnah that is often quoted. A Sanhedrin that executes once in 7 years is called murderous. Okay. And if you study Tractate Sanhedrin, you see that there are a tremendous number of hoops that you have to jump through before you can convict someone of murder and actually execute them. And if you follow that set of rules, it's virtually impossible to carry out an execution. But now, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah goes further. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says once in 70 years is too much. And now further, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, had we been members of a Sanhedrin, no person would ever be put to death. But then, so we can see this as a reflection of everything that we saw above. The Torah, in a fundamental way, is equating execution with murder. They're both killing. They're not radically different. They're different, but they're not radically different. And we've seen the hesitation about carrying out execution that exists in the minds of many. And so now the rabbis here are saying, you know what, that's right. So we might not be able to eliminate the death penalty. That's the question, right? Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say no one would ever be put to death. Now, how would they do that? The general understanding is they would find ways in each and every case of making it impossible to convict a person in a way that they would be put to death. But their position is sort of a logical conclusion from a certain discomfort and ethical discomfort with the idea of execution altogether, and saying, first of all, ideologically, if the punishment is death because of the infinite value of human life, we can't bargain over the punishment, then on the other hand, we shouldn't kill anybody. And if we shouldn't kill anybody, we also shouldn't have state-sponsored execution. Now we have the counter-argument. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel remarked, they would also multiply murderers in Israel, the deterrence theory, right? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is reflecting the view, you want to value human life, but in a way, by doing what you're doing, you're not valuing human life, or you're valuing the wrong human lives. You're taking pity on the murderer, but you're increasing the chances that others will be murdered. I'm not going to get into whether deterrence theory is, there's plenty of evidence that it's a flawed theory. But be that as it may, the ethical problem that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is raising is an important one. If we want to respect human life, we can't respect everyone's human life always in exactly the same way, because someone will be hurt. I mean, to me, this is very contemporary in another realm when people talk about freedom today. I have freedoms. Yeah, the problem is that my freedom can get in the way of your freedom. I'm not going to get into the politics here, but we all know that that's a tension, right? So Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, oh, okay, it's great. Let's value life. Everyone's life is important. But what happens if by valuing the life of A, you may be devaluing the life of B, the future possible victim? And what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying is, if I have to choose, I'm going to value the lives of possible future victims over the value of the life of the murderer. And so I say, execute him. This person is supposed to be executed. Okay. Any questions that anyone has at this point? Okay. So let's go on. Now, one of the ways in which the value of human life is recognized is that even when there is execution, the humanity of the victim, the criminal, I mean, the criminal who's being killed, okay? That person's humanity must be recognized. And therefore we have in Devarim, if a man is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death, and you impale him on a stake, you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So the question is, usually today, just the Hebrew is talita oto al eitz, which we usually translate, many translators, you'll hang him on the tree, as in hanging. But historically, it seems to have been impalement. That applies, by the way, to Haman and his sons as well. They probably were not hung from a gallows, but they were impaled. Not that it made much difference to them, I don't think, but just telling you. So the idea is an impaled body is an affront to God. What does that mean? So let's look at the rabbinic interpretation. Rabbi Meir would say, what does scripture teach when it says for the impaled corpse of a criminal is an affront to God? A parable. And notice that in the parable, they're going to understand this punishment not as impalement, but as crucifixion, because that's the kind of hanging that was going on in the rabbinic period. That's how you hung people, right? A parable. To what is this to be compared? To two brothers who were similar in appearance. One was the world ruler, Kosmokrator. This is a Greek word which was used by the Greeks and sometimes by the Romans to refer to literally it's a world ruler. That's literally what it is, but a great power. Interestingly, in the New Testament, it refers to Satan. Satan is the ruler of this world below. Anyway, so one was a world ruler, and the other became a thief. After some time, the thief was apprehended. They crucified him on a cross, and the passers-by would say, it seems as if the world ruler has been crucified. Right? So the two brothers look alike, the world ruler and the thief. The thief is crucified, and people say, oh my gosh, the world ruler has been crucified. Therefore, scripture states, for the impaled corpse of a criminal is an affront to God. In other words, he doesn't say it in so many words, but let's say it. In other words, when I see a human body defiled, in some sense, I see God defiled. Because every human being, even the lowest criminal, is made in God's image. And therefore, how the execution is handled is mediated by way of that concern, of recognizing the divinity within each human being, and therefore the need to show some respect for that person in death, at least, because of that. And in connection with this, we have an amazing statement by the rabbis. The Torah speaks of a number of forms of execution, and the rabbis codify the forms of execution as four: stoning, burning, beheading, and strangulation. Those are the four types of execution that are formulated by the rabbis and in conjunction with biblical verses determine when and how each should be administered. So the rabbis say that burning does not mean burning at the stake. It means that you cause someone to open his or her mouth and some hot lead is poured down the person's throat and their innards are scalded and they die. Horrible. The rabbis thought that this was more humane than burning someone at the stake. I have not experienced either. I hope not to experience either. I don't know, but let's go with it. Let's assume that that's true. So then the Talmud says, so why is it? In other words, the Talmud really understands that the simple meaning of the Torah, when it says that someone should be burned, means like burned at the stake. That's what it means. So the rabbis are asking themselves, why would we come up with this other, rather unlikely interpretation of what burning is? And the answer that's given is, Rabbi Nachman says, that Rabbi Bar Avua says, the verse states, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which teaches that even with regard to a condemned prisoner, one should select a good, in other words, a compassionate death for him. And then I add the explanatory note. The method of burning described in the Mishnah is certainly faster and less painful than the burning of the entire body. So think about that. The rabbis are saying that even a criminal, even someone who performed some heinous crime, deserves love as our neighbor, as our fellow human being, like anyone else. Now, the love that we're offering in this case is rather different from what we normally think of the love and the caring that we show others. But yet, the principle still applies. We cannot lose sight of the criminal's humanity. Let's see, how are we doing on time here?
You're
Okay.
We have a couple of questions, actually.
Okay, let's hear them.
We had one earlier from Ron Fetterman. I don't know, Ron, if you still want to ask it.
Yeah, I'm right here, and I'm kind of confused because the Torah, it seems to be all over the place with regard to interpretation of murder and killing. I mean, just
Right.
basic, simple, the story of Cain and Abel.
Right.
They weren't, how they were adjudicated was not, nobody lost their life. The story of Melch David and Bathsheba, it caused the man to be killed, her husband. And then you have Korach, they have the rebellion against Korach, and then multiple other sources and examples of this. So, and then you just said before that if someone committed murder, the trial can occur on Shabbat, which is a desecration of the Sabbath, and you convict somebody of murder. It's a mitzvah, it's a commandment. So I'm kind of confused about all this. Maybe you could respond to that a little bit.
Sure. So first of all, let me correct a misimpression. It's my fault. Rish Lakish was making the argument that it should be permitted to perform execution on Shabbat, but actually the Talmud concludes that it is not permitted to execute on Shabbat. That passage comes from the middle of a dispute. The second thing I'll say is we have to distinguish between the legal portions of the Torah and of Tanakh and the narrative portions. So Cain is not killed, David is not killed, but in those two cases, the judge with a capital J is God, and God writes the rules. And God decided, for whatever reason God decided, that Cain would not die. I mean, look, there are lots of other people in the Bible who die who are not murderers. They die for complaining, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the ways of the Lord are mysterious. And King David also, only God could be the judge because he was the king who was going to hold him in judgment. And Nathan the prophet, who took him to task was only doing that as God's emissary. If your point is that there isn't a consistency on this, yes, you're right. And I hope, you know, what you've seen in the sources that we've looked at so far is the struggle, right? Once we become aware that there's a problem here, that life is of infinite value, therefore the punishment for a murderer cannot be buying his way out of his crime. But then what should it be? So the Torah, on the whole, seems to say that we're going to do something paradoxical. Since life is so valuable, it can't be compensated for through any means other than killing the killer. But that's very problematic. And so now you have, in rabbinic discourse, a lot of uncertainty and discomfort, and some rabbis who end up saying, we cannot live with that paradox. If life is of infinite value, then capital punishment doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And that, if you may know, in the state of Israel, there's no capital. Eichmann was executed. He was hung. But in 1954, before Eichmann, capital punishment basically was removed from the options of punishment. Is that a reflection of rabbinic attitudes? My guess is that it is. That Israel was influenced by this rabbinic discomfort with capital punishment. Okay, there was another question or questions?
Ed Zinbarg, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Ed.
You may be getting to it, but the issue of just and unjust war, defining self-defense, all of these things, it depends on whose side you are, whether you consider it self-defense or not. Are you going to be talking about killing in self-defense and how the rabbis define it?
It's not in these sources. I'm happy to take a couple of minutes.
It's so relevant now in Israel, at Gaza and all of that.
I'm happy to say some things about it. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, the Torah does not adopt a philosophy of pacifism. And if you think about it, right, pacifism is the rabbinic attitude in the Mishnah of we wouldn't have executions taken to its extreme. In other words, if all killing is killing, and I take lo tirtzach, you shall not kill, literally, and meaning that no matter what, do not kill, then I can't be a soldier. I can't defend myself if someone attacks me by killing that person. I need to be Amish or a Quaker. And really, their pacifism is a reflection of taking lo tirtzach literally and unconditionally. Killing is wrong. You may not kill, no matter what the context, no matter what the reason. Better to be killed than to be a killer. And by the way, the rabbis also agree with that in an interesting way, in a particular case, which is, the rabbis say that there are three, that you may always violate the Torah for the sake of saving life, but there are three exceptions. And one of them is murder. I cannot murder someone else to save my own life. In other words, let's imagine the exact situation. Someone says to me, kill X or I'll kill you. I may not kill X to save my own life. And the Talmud, and Talmud says, so how do we know this? And the Talmud says, it's logical. My sumka damech midama dahai. Is your blood redder than the other person's blood? Which is a way of saying all human life is of equal value. And so therefore, what justification could there be for killing another person? But that's only in that case. The Torah endorses war. It endorses self-defense, and it derives that from a verse in Exodus about the tunneler, Baba Machteret. Somebody is tunneling into my property and is going to try to steal from me. And we know that that person is willing to kill me if necessary to steal my property. I can kill that person first. Okay, that's called Baba Machteret, the tunneler. The rabbinic principle is Haba lahorgecha hashkein v'hargo. Whenever we have good reason to think that someone is coming to kill us, we have the right to stand up and kill that person first. But that doesn't answer all your questions, because, as you said, when is this person a threat? I mean, if, to take a recent case, if an African American is running through my neighborhood, do I have the right to go and say, take my gun because I think this is threatening? Is that habar lahargacha hashkein lahargo? If someone is coming to kill you, you can kill that person first? Well, I know what my answer is. But it also does illustrate the squishiness. In other words, when am I being threatened? When am I being threatened enough to justify taking preemptive action? That is a very important question. It's a question that the Torah deals with, to which there is no simple answer. I'll just add one more thing. The rabbis distinguish between two types of war. You mentioned just and unjust war. That's actually a Christian distinction, but the rabbis have another distinction: milchemet mitzvah and milchemet reshut. War that is commanded and war that is optional. The rabbis recognize that there are some wars are, the example we all seem to use these days, World War II, where if you want to survive as a society, you're going to have to go in there and fight. Then there is milchemet reshut, wars that take place out of political considerations. And in the second case, the rabbis say that in the case of the first type of war, everyone is conscripted. Not so in the second war. In the first war, the king of Israel can declare war on his own. In the second case, he has to consult with the Sanhedrin. Now, these are fanciful. In other words, we don't have any records that any king of Israel had a Sanhedrin, whatever. But the rabbis are expressing an idea here. There's expressing an idea that there are different kinds of wars. And there should be different standards for determining whether to go to war, depending on the nature of that war. Now look, here too you're going to have problems. Was Vietnam a necessary war? Yes, if you accept the domino theory. Or no, it was a total waste of human life. It was just a foolish military adventure by the country. Again, I'm not going to get into politics, just saying that's just an example of how answering that very question, is this a milchemet mitzvah or a milchemet reshut? Is this a warranted war or a required war or an optional war? And one you have to think about very carefully. I don't have simple answers for you, Ed. I can outline the problems, give you some examples. The rest of it is above my pay grade. Sorry. We have other questions?
We did from Evelyn, but I think you may have answered. Evelyn, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, I think he answered it, that the person threatening you could possibly, you could kill that person, even though you don't kill the person he's asking you to kill.
Yes, no, those are right. So
yeah, you answered the question.
Okay, good. You certainly could kill the person who's saying, I'm going to kill if you don't kill the other person, right? If A says to B, kill C, or I'll kill you, B can't kill C, but B, if they had a chance, certainly kill A. All right. So the last thing I wanted to look at is, I mentioned before Len Fuller's idea of the Len Fuller's idea of the morality of duty, which is the basic morality that's necessary for society to be a civilized society. But there's also the morality of aspiration, which means that going beyond the letter of the law, what are the values that are embedded in the law? And how should I live in order to live out those values? So that's true of all of the 10 commandments and many other commandments as well. But I just want to show you a couple of instances of this with regard to the prohibition against killing. So there's a ceremony called the ceremony of the Eglah Arufah, the broken-necked calf. A corpse is discovered between cities. No one knows who the killer is. No luck finding the killer. So there's a ceremony. You take a calf out into the wilderness, and the people who from the city, the elders from the city closest to that place in the wilderness where you found the corpse, they come out and they wash their hands after the calf's or the heifer's neck was broken. You break the heifer's neck. The heifer either stands for the murderer or the victim, not clear. There are different theories, but there's some kind of substitution going on. So you break the heifer's neck. The elders from the nearest city come out, and they wash their hands with water in the place where the heifer's neck was broken, and they say, and now I'm reading in the Mishnah, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. That's what they have to declare. So that's in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 7. Now the rabbis comment on that verse. But did we really think that the elders of a court of justice are shedders of blood? Rather, the intention of their statement is that the man found dead did not come to us for help, and we dismissed him without supplying him with food, and we did not see him and let him go without escort. It's a little confusing in this translation. That's what we didn't do. In other words, if he came to us for help, we helped him. We didn't dismiss him without supplying him with food. We didn't see him and let him leave the city without escort. So think about what this Mishnah is saying. This Mishnah is saying there are a lot of ways of shedding blood. One is pull out a revolver, cock it, aim it, shoot. But there are more subtle ways of killing people. You don't supply them with food. You don't supply them with protection. And who is responsible at the end of the day for seeing that those things should happen? The elders of the city. We're all responsible, but in particular, the leadership of the community, country, whatever it is. I know I'm teetering on the edge of politics here. I think there's an important point being made, which you can apply as you like, but the point is an important point. What this Mishnah is saying is, if you don't want to be a murderer, it's not enough not to pull the trigger. You have to see whether you are living in a society that cares for the needy, that cares for the powerless, that cares for the unprotected. Because if you don't do that, then in some sense, your hands are shedding blood. You are not being responsible to your fellow human beings. Obviously, that has application now. I'm not a policymaker. I'm not saying what the exact application is. But I am saying this, that as Jews who believe in Lo Tirtzach and who understand that in saying Lo Tirtzach, the Torah is saying at some sense, and this is one of the functions of the Ten Commandments, let's keep it simple. Yes, things can get complicated. There are circumstances, there are contingencies, but never let this commandment leave your mind. Always say to yourself, you want to put in terms of, Hippocratic oath, do no harm. Do not kill. Do not do or allow things to happen that can lead to people's death. What that means for us right now, I don't know. We could argue about it. But we need to have this commandment in our head. We need to know that this is a dangerous time. And it's a time when this commandment of lo tirtzach is particularly relevant if we understand its full implications. It's not just about pulling the trigger. It's about being responsible citizens and responsible fellow human beings. That's how lo tirtzach has to be carried out. The fulfillment of this has to be carried out today, I believe. Okay, I see it's 1:30. We're supposed to stop now?
Well, there are not many supposed to's, but if there are any questions or comments,
Yes, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm sorry. We're supposed to, okay. I didn't phrase it correctly. If anyone has other questions, I'm happy to stay on. And actually, there's one more source in my presentation I have to, but we have officially concluded. I'm happy to stay and answer questions or engage any comments that people want to make.
I have something.
Sure, go ahead.
You started
Who
out,
is this? I can't see.
it's Harold Wolf in Toronto.
Okay.
You started out at the beginning and you were talking about establishing rules for society. And I think that a lot of what you've said has to do with that. You talked about intention and, and you have to do, which life do you value more highly, the murderer's life or the accosted person's life, things like that. So, I think that that's a lot of, and you ended up actually with saying the same thing, that in society, all members have to do whatever is necessary to ensure no one dies. It's kind of, you're talking about rules of society. And that's kind of what I'm taking out of what you're saying. Life is important. All lives are important. Even a dead person's life, body is important. But society has to have kind of rules on how it works.
Yes, that's true. The source that I didn't, sorry, was another question? So the source that I didn't show you makes the point, expands the parameters of lo tirtzach in a different way. It says that if I humiliate someone in public, then I am a shedder of blood. And the Talmud says, yes, because if you think about it, when you humiliate someone, they turn pale. The blood leaves their face. So even physiologically, there's a sort of shedding of blood. And I think that's a wonderful example, once again, of the rabbis saying, if we really understand what it means not to kill, we have to cast as broad a net as possible, as wide a net as possible, in thinking about, might this also be a form of killing? We talk about character assassination. Right? So to humiliate a fellow human being, the rabbis are arguing, is also a form of murder. Now, the rabbis are not saying, and this person should be treated exactly the same as somebody who shoots someone else. No, that's not true. But what they are saying is, if you understand the basic principle of lo tirtzach, and of all the commandments 6 through 10, which is respecting boundaries, respecting the integrity of other human beings and other relationships. If I really understand that, then I'm not going to humiliate someone in a way that destroys that person, their sense of self, how they look in the eyes of others. Because I will understand, well, I wouldn't pick up a gun and shoot this person. Well, to humiliate this person in public, isn't that a form of the same thing? And the rabbis are arguing, yes, yes, it is. So the rabbis often urge us to do is, with regard to every commandment, is to understand the underlying principle and then to say, and so the consequence of understanding that principle is that there are many things beyond the literal prohibition that are also prohibited. Don't kill, don't humiliate someone in public, don't make sure that you provide food and protection for people. The only true way to fulfill lo tirtzach is to do all of those things. They are all part of that package. And a literal fulfillment of the commandment is insufficient, say the rabbis. It's not enough. You're still not fulfilling the sixth commandment. If you're not shooting people, but you're letting people die in the street. You're humiliating people. Then there's something wrong.
We had one more question, I think, before we sign off. Meiji, do you still want to ask your question?
Thanks, Joan. First, I want to just thank the professor. This was very, very interesting and nuanced. And I also really enjoyed hearing Harold's summary. I was going to ask you, Professor, to summarize, and it was great. I haven't heard Harold in a really long time. So hi, Harold, up in Toronto. So good to see you. We started off this conversation comparing the translation between JPS and King James.
Yes.
And it seems that through this discussion, we kind of came closer to the King James.
Yeah, not closer. For my money, they're right. King James is right. I have greatest respect for the translators of the new JPS, and I don't mean to sound condescending, but I think what we can see here is that there is a deep resistance to using the same word in English to describe murder and other forms of killing, particularly those that we see as being warranted. Do we really want to say, well, somebody killed someone and therefore the court killed him? I mean, that's what happened, right? No, we can't debate that. But we've developed language to put distance between those two acts. Oh, that's murder. This is execution. There's a place for that language. If we're going to execute people, an argument can be made that we shouldn't, because it's just another form of killing. But if we're going to accept it and endorse it, yes, there is a need to use language, because otherwise you're saying that the court is on the same level as the killer, which I don't believe, and presumably any society that has capital punishment doesn't believe. But you can say that and still acknowledge that the language of the Torah itself is challenging us to acknowledge that maybe what we're doing now is justified and what the killer did was not justified. But we really are doing the very thing that he did, right? Maybe for very justifiable reasons, but we should not turn away from it. And frankly, the point is, if we really see that, maybe we'll do it less hastily. And we'll also perhaps do it more humanely if we were going to do it. So sort of having in my head, lo tirtzach means killing, all killing. So if you're going to kill, you better have a damn good reason for doing it. And you better do it in the most careful and humane way possible. Because at the end of the day, you're killing just like the person who you are, who killed someone else. That, to me, is the point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Diamond, for really a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
We all leave with a lot to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for your support for JTS. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. And again, remember to join us next Thursday. We're back to Thursdays for a learning session with Professor Marjorie Lehman on what's sure to be another relevant topic, thinking with the rabbinic household, making home a workplace and the workplace a home. Here we are. So keep staying well, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your help, Joan.
Thank you, Professor. It was great.
Hi, Carolyn. Goodbye, Art.